Hello, Selling Jesus listeners. Scott Holman, your host here. And today, this episode is for you if you are one of two people. The first person is the one who has met someone or knows someone that you have thought to yourself, there is absolutely no way that they could be interested in Jesus. Maybe you think they're too far. There's no way they can find him based on their lifestyle and where they're at. The second person could be that person who is living that lifestyle and thinks there is no way Jesus could love me with the life I live. I'm just too far from him. So if that's you, this episode's for you. But before we dive into that story, I always have a request. And like always, I'm still asking you to go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a little feedback. This is important as it will help our audience grow, as iTunes will take those new episodes that are getting a larger number of listens, subscribes, and reviews and place them in their new and noteworthy section, which is one of the very first sections seen when someone opens podcast within iTunes. Your subscribe and feedback will help us get this message out to many that need to hear more about Jesus. I thank you for that, and now let's dive into this story. I want to welcome our special guest today, Apericio Puentes, but most of us just call him Junior. So Junior, welcome to the show. Could you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself?
I think the biggest thing is that I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug addict who's just trying to get through life right now, just following God and just recovering from all the problems that I caused myself, and also just being a father and a husband to my wife, who is my main ministry as of right now. I guess as far as my work goes, I'm a concrete finisher. My dad taught me that trade as a young kid. I'm pretty proud of it. I enjoy working. I enjoy projects, doing things with the family. That's kind of my thing. When spend time with the kids, I just do a lot of building projects with them. We make things for the rooms. We just like to build, and that's just kind of me. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
You know what's exciting as I sit here and prepare to hear your story and learn a little more about you, and you're going to share with me and the listeners. I see the part about concrete finisher, and I've had the chance to see some of your photos on Facebook of your work, and you are an amazing artist, quite frankly, when it comes to concrete and building in general. And what's exciting to me is we're about to hear a story of a man who is building a new life with Christ, but you now have the proper concrete foundation in place, and you're building on the right foundation. And that excites me because knowing you have a full understanding of how strong concrete can be if the work is done properly.
Yes.
Well, Junior, let's dive right into this story. I always like to start with what life was like growing up. Who were you? What was your family like? But specifically, was Christ a part of your upbringing or not? And just kind of walk us through that if you would.
Yes. Christ was my father was a preacher when I was growing up. It's really a strange story, but I come from a background of I guess you would say they were all, they were gangsters, and they ran the streets a lot. My dad got saved, I think when he was 23. He gave his life to God, and he walked with God, I believe, for 15 years. And I guess the big part of my upbringing, of the story of it is, I believe like maybe at 8 years old that I gave my life to God, but not understanding what it really was. And then with the world all around me, it just kind of pulled me away. And I think the thing was is that I remembered my dad telling stories and people talking about my dad and about his younger days, and how how he was involved in the streets, and that seemed to grab my mind more than the preacher that I was seeing every day. And it breaks my heart today to know that I thought that way about my dad. But you know, the world just had such a strong pull on my family. We got a generational curse of addiction, and I just didn't really understand the man my dad was trying to be growing up, and I wanted to be the man he was as younger. The stories I heard, I wanted to be, that street kid who was tough and pretty much just what people would see as a gangster. And I know it's strange for a kid to think that way, but like in my home, my dad really tried for us to follow God, and but with the world around me in the neighborhood I lived in, everybody was about the streets, and drugs was a big part of my upbringing. And the thing is that it's like I said, it's really hard to explain because it's an odd story. My dad, when I was probably 13 or 14, had enough of his rebellious kids, and he won't tell us to this day, but I believe that we were the reason he walked away from God. Um, and it got to a point for my dad. My dad became an addict too, and we at one point used drugs together. We I guess I'm going more into my teenage years now.
No, you're fine. That's all part of the upbringing. I do have a
Yeah,
question as we talk through that, though. You talked about the pool of the world, I'll call it, the pool of your environment, quite frankly. And I don't know
yes,
exactly where you were raised, but it sounds like the streets were rough. There was a gang presence, a presence of drug use, and probably um, opportunities to distribute drugs and all of that around you. I personally grew up in the church, and one thing I think happens unintentionally is that Jesus is presented in some ways giving a mindset to young boys that he's a sissy and that he wants us to be sissies. And I guess my question is, was that kind of the presentation you were at least taking away from church as a child? And then you mentioned that the pull of just having an image of being tough was what started pulling you away.
yeah. The heroes that I've seen in my mind, that were created in my mind were the guys on the streets. And I seen my dad, and I seen him struggle so much with the church. Just the church in general was rebellious too against my dad. I don't really quite understand. I was so young or what was going on, but there was separation in the church. There was a lot of confusion for me, and I think the big thing is that I'm half Mexican and I'm half white. My dad's a full-blooded Mexican, so he preached at a all Spanish church. He mainly ministered people from Mexico and stuff like that. And growing up, we spoke English in our family. I didn't really grab onto Spanish. And when he spoke at church, he preached in Spanish, and everybody preached in Spanish. So the gospel kind of went over my head a little bit.
Makes
My
sense.
my dad, yeah, my dad really he tried, but he wasn't a good communicator with us kids. And I'm I'm kind of the same way now. Um, when my dad wanted to spend time and communicate with us, he brought us to work pouring concrete. You know, that was his way of spending time with us, and that's kind of what I've carried on to my kids too. We're not big communicators in my family, so I think that played a part in me not grasping the gospel at a young age. I had quite an understanding of it, but I really didn't get it. I didn't get that suffering was a part of your walk with God, and that not only that the suffering was a part of your walk, but it was a part of you growing. It was a necessity that you had to go through suffering to learn to lean on God. And I hope my mind gets scattered sometimes. Um, I didn't understand that how the beauty of your suffering, that what it does, and how it grows you in Christ, and how God uses it for the future. for other things. I just seen it as a wasteful piece of time that could be done, being used somewhere else. And with the world just not having a care in the world, and everybody just seemed to love life, and um, it was a cool thing to do drugs and run the streets, and that was fun. Going to church and sitting in church for, I went to my dad was they were Pentecostals, and their church services were like 2.5, 3 hours long, and that was just boring to me. And then I couldn't understand it. I liked the music, you know, but I couldn't understand the words of what they were saying. So my mind would just drift off into La La Land, and I would just dream of, of being this other person that I wanted to be. And these people in this church, they just didn't really, they didn't get my attention. Um,
What
but
age were
kind of,
you when you were able to finally walk away from church, I'm going to call it, and you started making really your own decisions and made a decision to follow the gang life, the drug life, being that person that as a young boy you were actually dreaming of?
I guess probably 12 to 13, my teenage years, once I started to really rebel. I was pretty, I guess growing up, my mom tells me, I don't quite remember, but she tells me I was pretty obedient. I was a sweet kid, and um, just really didn't really have a whole lot of cares. But I guess when my teenage years came along, that's when it got bad for me. My brains kind of fell out, I guess.
At 12, 13, most boys especially, I think girls do a little better, but most boys lose their head in general.
Yeah, I see it in my kids.
I have a good boy, and I see it. Sometimes I just shake my head and wonder. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
let me ask this: can you walk us through the details? And you don't have to get like in all the mud, but at the age of 12, 13, you started to rebel. What did those years look like?
They were really confusing for me because I looked white, and I was in an all Mexican neighborhood. So I got made fun of a lot for not being Mexican. In my heart, I wanted to be, like I said, this is strange. In my heart, I wanted to be Mexican. I wanted to be like the kids in the neighborhood. But on the outside, I looked different than everybody else. So I tried extra hard to play the part of being tough, of being Mexican, and just that pride that the Mexicans had, in my neighborhood.
Hmm.
And it was just really difficult for me. So I think the more that I stood out, the more trouble that I caused, the more drugs that I did. I felt more involved with them, more accepted, and it just kind of spiraled out of control. I just didn't want to go to school. I was getting kicked out of school. Um, I mean, just that whole life of just rebellion. And then my dad was just really frustrated with me. So I'd move back. My mom was from Missouri, so I'd move back and forth and get trouble in Texas and move to Missouri, and it's just a back and forth thing, and just a lot of frustration with my parents not knowing how to handle me, and
Unders-
it just got bad as the years went on. The drugs got worse and worse. It started off with marijuana and a little bit of just pills that kids would bring to school, but it was more mainly marijuana the first couple of years before the real hard drugs started coming into play in my life.
I hear that it's kind of a growth thing. One thing leads to another, and that's pretty much any addiction. It all starts pretty small and innocent most times and grows from there. How much of the start was really about acceptance? Looking back as a more mature adult, how much was driven by just wanting to be accepted?
I say 90% of it. It was wanting to be accepted because I did move around a lot. Because my parents got a divorce when I was pretty young, so I was always in a new school, and just I was kind of like a chameleon. My mom was from the country, so when I moved to the country, I wanted to be, like the country kids. And when I moved back to, you know, my dad's neighborhood, I wanted to be like them. So I think my personality was pretty confused growing up. I didn't really know who I was because I was so many different people. I just wanted to be like everybody else. I wanted to stand out because I wanted people to notice me, but I also wanted to kind of blend in too at the same time and just be like everybody else. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely does. So now I'm going to ask you another question. There's a famous quote by Jim Rohn. It's a business quote, but one that I just love. And it says that you are the average of the five people you hang out with most. Other people would say you are who you hang out with. Do you
Yeah.
think if you would have had an opportunity to be around more, uh, better influences, maybe in a youth group that had a Christian, a group of Christ following youngsters, would you have had a better chance of making it through without some of the mistakes you possibly have made in your past?
Yeah, definitely. All the kids that that were in our church, they were all rebellious. Like I didn't know that preachers' kids, actually followed Christ. I just thought that they were, preacher kids were the worst ones of them all because, like my dad's friends, it wasn't just like one church; it was a community of churches in different towns. Because Texas is so big, and all the preachers' kids, went down the wrong path, at a young age. A lot of them went to prison for murder, and a lot of the pastors that my dad knew, they came from the streets, and a lot of them did commit murders and stuff like that, but they gave their lives to God. And I guess they were just in the moment of trying to, how do you say it, that all my dad's friends, which they were all preachers, he knew growing up, um yeah, they all came from the streets. So I guess they were trying in their later years to turn that generational curse that their families brought them through and not pass it on to their kids. But it was just so fresh and just so new, and somehow the world just grabbed onto all of us. I can't remember. I mean, there is now when I look back and I see the kids that have grown up and gone through that life. They're like me. They've given their life back to God, but it's taken a long road before they got there. A long road of trouble. So yeah, if I believe in my heart, if I could have had maybe English speaking for sure, and just some youth that really did follow Christ, so I could see that God did come to the hearts of young people, because the people that I was around, it didn't. Like I said, I didn't think that preachers' kids really gave their lives to God. But I also lived in the moment, and there's a lot I didn't see because in my little world, that's just the way things were, and I didn't really see how everybody else lived. I just knew what was going on in my world.
Right. Well, there's something that I recently read, and I believe this is true, and it's true for every human being. And it said there's one thing that every human being longs for, and that's acceptance, the desire to be accepted by others. And I asked you that question because I want to go ahead and put this out for those parents who are raising children and they desire for their children to walk the straight and narrow and follow Christ on through their adult life. I just want to ensure everyone understands the importance of finding a church that maybe as the adult you don't love, but yet for the kids, there's an opportunity for them to learn, to understand, and I really feel most importantly, there are kids there that are serving Christ. I also want everyone to know that just because they go to church does not mean they're serving Christ, so you may have to dig in a little bit, but find that church where your kids can be in an environment where they're around others who are making good decisions, and odds are that your child will make better decisions as well when they're in that environment because they seek
I agree.
acceptance, and acceptance is by doing the good things, not the bad things.
Yes, I agree.
Um, All right, so Junior, you've kind of talked about our teens and how we have moved into um, harder drugs. I'm sure this just progressively got worse. The addiction got stronger and a much stronger hold on your life. Is there anything else you would like to share with us before we dive into what eventually started drawing you to Christ?
Um, Let me think. I mean, there was such a long road before I didn't give my life to God till I think I was 28, I believe it was, and it took a lot of heartache before I got there. I was in prison multiple times. I believe like I can't really talk about how I gave my life to God or really about how my pain and suffering that I went through, the prison, the drugs, the loss of family members, all the hurt that actually that actually came a part of my salvation. It took all of that to get me to drop to my knees and say, you know what, I I, I have to do something. I got to see, what is God doing? If there is a God, is he going to save me? Is life always going to be this way? Because people always said I was either going to be in prison the rest of my life or I'd be dead. And multiple times I've come close to both. And I guess what I'm just trying to say is that the hurt has just been so much a big part of me giving my life to God, which I think in everybody's life has kind of been that way. I think,
No,
you know,
I think you're right. It's the story's just a little different getting there, and no one story's any better than the other. We all just have a life of pain, of suffering of some sort. We all have, quite frankly, our own various temptations and addictions we all deal with, and ultimately have to rely on Christ to get us through. What got you to the point of falling down on your knees? You kind of summarized it there. Was it just realizing that there was no satisfaction in the road that you began to follow?
well, there was just a lot of heartache. I think that the big moment, I gave my life to God when I was in prison. The big moment was I'd gotten myself involved with prison gangs, and I was actually I was running with one prison gang, but I was it's kind of weird. I had a tattoo of another prison gang, um, and it was just a big conflict of back to me being half Mexican and half white, uh, and it caused a lot of drama, while I was in prison and inside of my mind because of all the drugs and um, just the chaos that was going on in my mind. There was absolutely no peace for me whatsoever. I mean, if you think about torment and a little hell of just like somebody inside your ear at all times telling you exactly every little bad thing that might happen at any second of every day, going to even eat dinner, or we call it chow in prison, going to eat chow. Um, my anxiety was so high because I was constantly watching my back. Not that, I was going to get stabbed or anything like that because I've been stabbed before, but I was just like, when are they going to get me? What's going to happen? It was just a constant. No, I wasn't scared to die or anything like that. There was fear, but dying wasn't really a big fear of mine. Um, but it's just a constant torment that the enemy was tormenting me. I mean, there was a lot going on, with the prison gangs and stuff like that. And I was just really tired of the anxiety of, every time you turn around, somebody, there's so much of the macho-ness, somebody's wanting to fight. And um, in the prison lifestyle, it was if your buddies, your partners, whoever you're running with, if one of them gets in trouble with another crew, then if you don't help them out, then they come after you. And it's just that whole lifestyle was just really just killing me, man. And I had kids already by then that I didn't even know because the lifestyle that I chose, um, I couldn't even see them. You know what I mean? And they were at that point, they were already 8, 9 years old and calling somebody else daddy, and it was just really heartbreaking for me. And just like all the other kids, my brother's kids, who I was real close to, watching them grow up in pictures and just all that I was missing. Most of my 20s, I was in and out of prison, and it was just a big waste of time. And I remember lying in bed one night, and just all that torment was on me. And I was just like, I was just looking up at the ceiling. And I'm like, God, if you're real, you please just give me peace. I can't take this no more. I was at my, wit's end, and I went to sleep at night, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I just had like this amazing peace all over me. It's the only time I ever experienced it before, and I believe that was God's sign. He's like, here's a little bit of my peace. This is what you're missing. And I went back to sleep. I woke up, and all the chaos and all the pain was there again. And I was like, man, what is this? And that just started my walk with God. And I gave my life to God. And God had put a Christian man who was in prison in my dormitory, who just kind of walked me through it. But it was a real hard time for me. I had to walk away from all the guys and pretty much just say I was a chump. And I was constantly inside my cell, and I wouldn't, because they allow you to go out into the yard for rec and stuff like that. And I just kept on thinking, I said, if I go out there, I'm gonna be fighting with people. There still was a lot of anxiety inside of me, and I just couldn't wait to get out of prison and start my life over again. And my brothers, which this is jumping around a little bit, but my dad was in prison too, because my whole family just went, down the tube. Everybody was hooked on drugs, but at one point, my brother was locked up. Both of my brothers was locked up. My sister was locked up. My dad was in the federal penitentiary. I was in prison. But all at the same time, God had grasped all of our hearts. In that 1 year, with us all being locked up, God did something and got us all. And to this day, we're all saved. One of them has passed away, but we're all saved. Whatever, however God did it, He did it miraculously. And looking back on it now, I see how amazing that he did it. I mean, not very many families that come from where I come from and did the things that we did in 1 year, just all give their lives to God and turn their life around.
Yeah,
And that's
wow.
what happened.
And so what you're telling me then is every person, this happened in the same year, but in different places. So this had
Yes.
to be a God thing. This was not the fact that Junior started finding Christ and he started talking to them, and it was just God working out the details and orchestrating the details to bring an entire family back to Him.
Yeah, I actually couldn't even contact any of my family. Like my dad, I couldn't write him, because by law you're not able to write. If you're in a state prison, you're not able to write anybody in a federal prison. So there was no communication whatsoever for me, I think 3 years I was locked up at that point. I can't remember. There were so many different times. But yeah, there was no communication. But at the end, I was the last one getting out of prison. My dad, my brothers, they were all out, and they were serving God. And I had two brothers up in Missouri. One was here in St. Louis, and they had a program called Mission Gate Prison Ministries. Is for ex-convicts. And my mom had come visit me. She told me that where my brothers are at, they were in this program, and they really wanted me to go there with them to just learn how to walk, just a regular life. Because like I said, our minds were so chaotic that we didn't know what normal was. It just to go to work every day, to come home at night, to go to sleep and do that routine again was a miracle in itself for us to be able to do that. I mean, that's how bad it was for us.
Wow.
And that's how I pretty much got here.
Let me jump back. One quick thing that jumped to mind. You talked about how when you were in prison and you had that night where you feel God just gave you a little bit of peace to know what that peace could feel like. And you talked about a Christian man in prison that started having an influence in your life. We talked earlier often that we think of Christians as, again, sometimes we say the word sissies. They can't be tough guys, real people that make a decision to follow Jesus. But here's a man in prison who calls himself a Christian. What was his story? I mean, how's a Christian end up in prison? Or was he in prison and found Christ? Can you give us a little overview of what happened in his life?
yeah, he was in prison and he found God, and he was a gang member too, and we claimed the same gang. And that was the thing, is that he was highly respected, from a lot of the guys, because he had put in a lot of work in the gangs. Um, he had been in the gangs for his whole life, and when he gave his life to God, for some reason they didn't bother him. He had to respect that for some reason it didn't bother him, and I guess that kind of drawed me to him, because I was still bouncing back and forth trying to figure out who I was. But this man was so certain that God was real, and I just really respected that, where he came from. You know what I mean? Because he was a real deal. There really wasn't no games with him. He was the real deal. And like I said, he gave his life to God in prison, and he tried to. He was pretty quiet. He tried to minister. He would let people come to him. He wasn't really one of them guys that just walked around and tried to talk to God or talk about God to everybody. He just let people come to him, and God drawed me to him because, first off, he was Mexican, and we were both, claiming the same gang. That part was, I guess, kind of, how do you say it? Kind of drawed us together, and we just had a communication automatically right there with that. And
Right.
he just kind of talked to me about God, and I was still being rebellious towards it. And he was just really, for some reason, I don't even know how it happened, but he just became a big part of my life while I was locked up. And he even actually came to the program with me when he got out of prison. And we walked a year together, a little over a year, on the streets together, as Christians outside of prison.
I think what's so exciting to me when I hear this story is God places us where we're at to minister to others. And this guy had an impact in your life in prison.
Yes.
All right. So your journey to Christ began once again while you were in prison. You couldn't wait to get out so you could start this new life. I know that you're no longer in prison. So tell me a little about this journey and how you started growing in your relationship with Christ.
Well, I mean, like I said, it started with Mission Gate. That program I went through was for a year long. I actually went twice because there was a lot of multiple. There was relapses. It hasn't been like I got saved and everything started to be perfect from there on out. And that's what I didn't understand when I was locked up. I just thought, okay, now I'm saved. As long as I get out of prison, life is going to be good. I'll find a wife. We'll get married. I get back with my kids. I'll show them I'm this amazing dad, and everything was going to be great. Happy ever after.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't true because I didn't understand, and nobody really explained to me that the trials and all the heartache that you go through, it don't stop when you become a Christian. That's part of your Christian walk. And because I didn't understand that, it caused a lot of stumbling blocks for me. And still to this day, it's a struggle. But like I said, I started off at Mission Gate, and I was in Cuba, Missouri, with my brother. I got to tell you this part because this is such a big part of my testimony, that when I tell people, my brother, he's passed away now. Give me a second. Like my first day out of prison, um, I was able to go to this little country house, Mission Gate. And in the first time in the morning, my brother's standing there at the door like he had been, almost every time I got out of prison. He's always just been there for me. We're really close. But he was different at the time. He wasn't strung out on drugs. He was healthy. He was happy. And we were walking down this little country road there was cabins to get to these cabins that he lived in. I'm walking down this old dirt road with him. It just kind of was reminding me when we were kids. And, he was just sitting there explaining to me that, God has been good to him. And I'm sitting there looking at him, and I think he made $8 an hour. The only thing he had in his refrigerator was mainly bologna and bread, but he was paying his child support for his kids. And in the world's eyes, I mean, how can anybody look at a person like that and say, how can he say that God is good when he has absolutely nothing at all except a roof over his head? Um, but that was just such a defining moment for me to see God in somebody else that I had known growing up, and going through what we've gone through together, and just seeing the change in his eyes and in his heart, and be like, man, I really didn't notice how God was changing me because it was inside of me, but to sit there and see what he was doing inside of my brother, it was just an eye opener. And God, I believe God put me there, with him, because he was going to guide me. God used my brother to guide me through this program, because I was still pretty wild inside of my mind. I was an angry kid. I wasn't a kid no more, but I was an angry man. I was mad at the world, and I still thought I had something to prove to everybody that crossed my path. He multiple times would have to calm me down, because somebody walking in front of me, if they didn't say excuse me, that would anger me, because that was a sign of disrespect. And he just really walked me through. He was constantly on me about obedience and being obedient to the authority around us. It was a big part. That year right there really defined my Christian walk. And after I left that program, I went home where my mom lived in Missouri, and I started to do carpentry work with my brother. And I think I was sober probably, a year after that. And me trying to rush life and do what I wanted to do, it caused relapses. A woman was a big part of it. I wasn't willing to wait on God, so I got involved with the first woman that I thought that was a Christian, who, yes, she was a Christian, but it just wasn't God's timing, and it caused some relapses. And she was pretty new, and it just really caused a lot of problems for us. And my brother had relapsed too, so it got back to being pretty crazy again, but not for long. That only lasted a few months, and then my brother had passed away. We were on we used to build hotels, and we were on a hotel building, and he fell off the roof and he died. And that right there just sent me into a spiral of drug use
I can
for
imagine.
probably 2 weeks. And it about killed me. And I believe God saved me again through prison, through there, because I went back. Cause we didn't bury him 2 weeks later. I was already locked back up. I pretty much just said, the heck with everything. And, but I was never mad at God. I didn't blame God for my brother's death. It was just kind of, I don't know. It was pretty numbing. I stuffed a lot of stuff. I just used drugs to kind of cover everything up. But if I wouldn't have got locked up, I believe I'd be dead right now too. And then, yeah, it's just, that started another chapter in my life. I stayed locked up for probably another year. And my other brother, who was in a program here in St. Louis, he had relapsed too. I think the only one who didn't was my dad and my sister. I don't think they've ever relapsed as far as back into the hard drugs. I know my sister did a little bit, but continued, was able to continue in her Christian walk, not like me and my brothers. But my older brother, he blamed God. He was mad at God for Christino, which is one that passed away. He blamed God. He just didn't understand it, and because he prayed and prayed for God to save him, because he was in a coma for a week, and God didn't, and it just really is like, well, you said if I prayed for it, you would give it to me. How come you're not giving it to me, sort of thing? And it just caused a real big excuse to go back to the drug use. And he was trapped in it for probably another 2 years. But anyway, it got me to St. Louis. After I got out of prison from there, I gave my life back to God. And I went to the program again, but this one was here in St. Louis. And that's kind of how I got here in St. Louis, because my brother was here, and we had just lost Christino, and it was only a year later. And I'm like, man, I was like, somehow we gotta stay together. And he was the only one in St. Louis, so we just said, you know what, I'm gonna come to the program there, and I really didn't know what I was gonna do. Like, you know, I come there and just see what happens. I didn't have a vehicle. I mean, I didn't have anything. I had a tool belt, a Bible, and my prison release papers when I got out. And God just put on my heart from there on out to just work, and kind of got me to being kind of a workaholic. But
Took your
yeah, I mean,
attention off other
that's the
stuff.
start of this new chapter.
Absolutely. Let me ask this. From allowing you to possibly speak into the heart of someone like you who's on a similar journey, you talk about the relapse, and a lot of times you'll hear someone talk about their testimony, and they'll talk about how when they gave their life to Christ, overnight everything changed, and they never had a uh, they never looked back. And that's great, and I applaud those people, but I'm not sure that is the norm. My experience is life is a journey, and we have ups, downs, and we're human. And no matter how hard we try to follow Christ, we still make mistakes. I know that it's easy to rationalize a decision we make, and I'm sure in your mind you were able to rationalize some of the things you were doing. But looking back, what would you tell the person who's trying to follow God, but they're in the middle of a relapse? Because we know that God does not give up. Is there any type of encouragement you would offer them based on who you are right now?
Well, I mean, one thing I can say, and which has given me hope, you know, with my kids, is that, you know, once you're saved, you can't take that back. God may allow you to to run your face through the gutter, and allow your wants and your desires and your selfishness to get you in a whole lot of trouble. But it don't change the fact that you're still His, and that eventually you will come back to Him. So it's really hard to encourage somebody who's in the um, in that moment on drugs. uh, I've always said that you have to let them come down, not like get sober or anything like that, but just let the effects of the drugs wear off a little bit, to where their mind and their hearts start realizing that they're broken. Because when they're high and stuff like that, they don't realize they're broken because they're high and they don't feel nothing.
Hmm.
So that's why they stay high. Um, but that would be my only encouragement to them, is that God has not given up on you. I know it's kind of like a cliche that people say that, but just because you've given up on God don't mean that He's given up on you. And no matter how much you run from Him and how much drug, that you use and everything, He's still going to be there. He's still going to be calling you. Every moment of every day that you make any decision, I believe He's playing a part in it. I can remember many times where I sensed God. Now that I look back at my drug use, through my relapses, and how He's protected me from, stupid things that could have got me locked back up, um, and how He was just there, just kind of patiently waiting on me uh, to fall to my knees, because that's what happens, is that we cause so much hurt and chaos in our life that we can't control it no more. We burn every bridge. We just we break our family's heart, and we just there's that day that we're just like, man, this hurts, and it hurts so bad, and there's nothing that you can turn to anymore, because the drugs aren't helping. There's not a person in the world that can tell you it's going to be okay. Um, so you fall to your knees, and you just pray to God. And a lot of times, like for me, and like you said, He don't miraculously just heal us. And I've heard Pastor Sean talk about it, that it's great when you get the magical healing that people talk about. But as for me and my family, we're going through the healing process of life. We're not just um, we're just not completely healed from our addictions. We're not just completely healed from our hurts. Um, God's walking with us through all of our our heartaches and our addictions, and that's how it is for us.
That's why this podcast is it's called the Selling Jesus Podcast, but you'll see right under it a journey of faith, and it's really a journey. It's not an overnight. Um, Nothing happens overnight, and quite frankly, although my testimony was given very early in this podcast series, I've been in church my entire life. I always say I followed Christ pretty much my entire life. But what I can tell you is every day God is challenging me. The Holy Spirit's working on me to continue to become more like Him. It just doesn't happen overnight. Um, I appreciate what you said in your encouragement. You know, Jesus gave us the parable of the prodigal son who walked away from his family, ran away from his family to do his own thing, and came back. And the one thing that I think we miss is that father's love never died. That father may have been disappointed. That father may have had heartache. That father may have known that his son was making some horrible decisions, but the reality is that father never stopped loving his son. Now, the son had made decisions. The son had decided to walk away from the family. That was not a decision made by the father. And that is the truth in our life. And just as you said to others, it's the reality that God never stops loving us. Never. There's nothing we can do that will make him stop. And anytime we're ready to come back, he's right there, just like the parable of the prodigal son, right there to throw his arms around us, embrace us, and throw a feast. And that, Junior, it's just amazing to me. He's not a God that's looking for every mistake so he can blot it out and erase your name from the book of life. That's not the God that we serve. If that's who you think it is, you've got the wrong picture. It's a God who loves and is just longing for you to come and spend time with him.
Yes. It reminds me of too when my dad told me a little bit of his story, because like we were separated. Like I said, he was a pastor for 15 years, and he really loved God. He never stopped believing in God. But like I said, I believe because of the rebellious of the church and his kids, um, he walked away from the church. He didn't. I don't know. Yeah, he did walk away from God. But the thing was, I remember my dad telling me. Was actually my brother Cristino told me what my dad had told him, that he the reason why he used drugs, I think it was for 10 years. My dad became an IV user, and this is just how the devil just gets you when you walk away from the Lord. But you know, my dad told my brother that he had to use drugs every day. He had to shoot up every day because the shame and the guilt that the enemy had on him for walk away from the Lord was unbearable. You know, because like I said, my dad walked away from God, but he didn't stop believing that, that God was real. You know, he still believed that the devil was real and believed that God was real. He just believed that, he was just at a time in his life that, I don't know, I guess he tried to do everything on his own, and it didn't work out for him, so he gave up. But the point I'm trying to make is my dad got busted with drugs, and it was a large amount. So it became federal prison time, and he ran from the cops, and he was using drugs for a year heavily. More heavily than anything. And when the federal marshals finally got him, Dad, on the way up to the holding facility, he was just thinking about God. Like, God, you will never forgive me for the things I've done. I'm too horrible now. I've sinned too much. Look what I've done to my family. Stuff like that. And I remember my dad telling me this part. He said that when he got there, his first night in that cell, he said he got down on his knees and he prayed to God, and he asked God for forgiveness for his sins. And he said when he stood up that, from that prayer, he's like he never walked away from God. God's grace, God's forgiveness. He said he felt it all. He said nothing has ever changed, as if nothing had changed. He said God was the same that moment that he was when he first gave his life to God. And from that point on, my dad has successfully, I say successfully, put his life back together from from absolutely nothing. And his story is, to me, is amazing because I'm a daddy's boy all the way. Um, but I just wanted to say that because God, it just shows you how how big God's grace is, and how easy He is to forgive, and how easy it is for you just to give your life to God. And sometimes, like you said, it don't always just miraculously happen like it happened to my dad, where he just felt all the forgiveness. For me, I didn't feel it all at once. It's a healing process for me. I'm still learning how to forgive myself and believe that God forgives me every day. So,
Absolutely. And as you know, if we go by feeling all the time, we're going to lose. It's not based on feeling, it's based on what the Word of God says. And the Word of God says that we are covered. We're white as snow. And we just have to believe the words and have faith in the words, even when we're not always feeling it. So I appreciate that story and appreciate you sharing that with us. We're starting to run low on time, Junior, so I want to ask if you could just summarize, who are you today? I know you're still growing. You've already made that clear, but who are you today in Christ?
um, at times, I'm still a little lost, to be honest. Um, there's a lot of growing to do. I'm still trying to manage my anger, but I guess I can finally say, at this point in my life, that I am a Christian, and that God does love me, and He does have grace on my life, and who I am is, I believe, I'm a minister to my family, to my wife, to my kids, to my coworkers. I believe, I'm a hardworking man, and I take pride in that, and I believe that this ain't just it. And I've come to a point in my life that hurt hurt is a part of growing in Christ. And it's just in this moment right now, God is really speaking to me that I cannot grow in Him if I don't go through the suffering first. And and I believe, like, in the 5 years that I've been married, me and my wife have gone through a lot of suffering with our children. Mainly within the first 6 months of our marriage, I lost my son to cancer, who was 18 years old. Uh, our kids were hooked on drugs. We had multiple relapses, through these 5 years. And God is just getting us right now, this family, to a healing spot. And I believe that, when I say who we are, we are we are crazy. But we love the Lord. We get mad and angry and we cuss, and but we forgive. So when I think of me and my family, I just think of healing. That's what I see. Because we're all broken, and that's just how I see it. I just see it as God's children, and He's healing us, and it's going to take a long time, and there probably will never be ever a complete healing until we get to heaven. But that's what I see in my life right now. Is I'm just being healed by God.
And Junior,
And
through your healing and through your sharing of this story, you're being a huge part of healing for others. And your story that you have shared today, I'm confident, is going to help others in a similar lifestyle, a similar upbringing, similar emotions that you endured, be able to make a decision. And what I'm most excited about is I believe that there are listeners right now who are struggling with the relapse. And I appreciate your humility and your humbleness and your willingness to say that life is still not perfect for you. There's still a lot of growth for you, there's a lot of growth for your family. I appreciate you just being open because we Christians, we're not perfect. We're just people who need Jesus and we're trying to get better. And your story is going to minister to many. So, again, I thank you for the time. We do have to call this episode a close, but I appreciate you sharing your story with us today.
okay, buddy, I appreciate it. Thank you.